All right, we are recording. This is the first session of Just This by Richard Rohr, the book study. And welcome, everybody. So great to have you here. And so for everyone who is watching this via recording and archive, welcome to the study as well. And we're going to take this maybe a little differently. I want to see if we can read longer sections because this is much more conversational, certainly than Brother Lawrence was, and kind of a different feel to the book. So I'm thinking what we'll do is read, I don't know, maybe we can read this whole section. What we'd like to start is page 7 tonight, and this is the introduction. And the title is Awe and Surrendering to It. Awe and Surrendering. And so it's just about 5 pages. So I think what we'd like to do is just kind of read through it, and then we'll go back after we've read through it and pick it apart as we typically do and comment on it. But I think it'd be good to get the whole thing in context to kind of run through it. I was attracted to this book through little excerpts that I was reading online, and it just seemed like a great, they're really kind of meditations on the contemplative life, on the experience of contemplative prayer. And so this is a relatively recent book. I think it's only 3 or 4 years old, something like that. And so it comes at a time in Richard Rohr's life where he is slowing down now. He is pulled out of day-to-day operations at the Center for Action and Contemplation. He is spending a lot more time in his hermitage, and from all reports, and just kind of withdrawing a bit, from the active spotlight. And so this book at the end of his career, just kind of talking about the basics of contemplative life, how it feels, what it's about. I thought this would be a great follow-on to Brother Lawrence in the practice of the presence of God. So we can just kind of dig in a little deeper and get a perspective on contemplative life 300 years later, and from someone who is 50 years into the journey himself. So are there any comments or questions? Anyone want to say anything before we dive in?
Sounds good.
Okay.
I like.
Well, good then. I'm sorry. Someone?
I was going to say that I've been reading it, and I enjoy the bottom of the page where it says the contemplative mind does not tell us what to see, but teaches us how to see what we behold. And I think that's a wonderful introduction to what I'm reading.
Okay. You're reading ahead there, John. Good for you.
Takes me a while.
All right. Here comes William. Just in time. Let's let him get established here before we start reading. There he is. Hey, William.
Hey, yo.
Okay. You missed all the introductory stuff, so we're just about starting to read on page 7. Do you have a book?
Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
Good for you. Okay. So navigate your way to page 7, and we're going to start reading the introduction. So awe and surrendering to it. He has an epigraph here from Isaiah 65, verse 1. I am ready. This is the Lord speaking. I am ready to be approached by those who do not study me, ready to be found by those who do not seek me. I say, I am here to people who do not even invoke my name. We'll talk more about that in a second. Perhaps more than anything else, Just This is a book about seeing, but a kind of seeing that is much more than mere looking, because it also includes recognizing and thus appreciating. This is the kind of seeing we do in contemplation, the centerpiece of any authentic inner dialogue. The contemplative mind does not tell us what to see, but teaches us how to see what we behold. Contemplation allows us to see the truth of things in their wholeness. It is a mental discipline and gift that detaches us, even neurologically, from our addiction to our habitual way of thinking, and from our left brain, which likes to think it is in control. We stop believing our little binary mind which strips things down to two choices and then usually identifies with one of them, and begin to recognize the inadequacy of that limited way of knowing reality. In fact, a binary mind is a recipe for superficiality, if not silliness. Only the contemplative or the deeply intuitive can start venturing out into much broader and more open-ended horizons. This is probably why Einstein said that imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited. Imagination encircles the world. But how do we learn this contemplative mind, this deep, mysterious, life-giving way of seeing, of being with reality? Why does it not come naturally to us? Actually, it does come momentarily in states of great love and great suffering. But such wide-eyed seeing normally does not last. We return quickly to dualistic analysis and use our judgments to retake control. A prayer practice, contemplation, is simply a way of maintaining the fruits of great love and great suffering over the long haul and in different situations. And that takes a lot of practice. In fact, our whole life becomes one continual practice. To begin to see with new eyes, we must observe and usually be humiliated by the habitual way we encounter each and every moment. It is humiliating because we will see that we are well practiced in just a few predictable responses. Few of our responses are original, fresh, or naturally respectful of what is right in front of us. The most common human responses to a new moment are mistrust, cynicism, fear, knee-jerk reactions, a spirit of dismissal, and overriding judgmentalism. It is so discouraging when we have the courage to finally see that these are the common ways that the ego tries to be in control of the data, instead of allowing the moment to get some control over us and teach us something new. To let the moment teach us, we must allow ourselves to be at least slightly stunned by it until it draws us inward and upward toward a subtle experience of wonder. We normally need a single moment of gratuitous awe to get us started. And such moments are the only solid foundation for the entire religious instinct and journey. Look, for example, at the Judeo-Christian Exodus narrative. It all begins with a murderer, Moses, on the run from the law, encountering a paradoxical bush that burns without being consumed. Struck by awe, he takes off his shoes, and the very earth beneath his feet becomes holy ground, because he has met being itself. This narrative reveals the classic pattern, repeated in different forms in the varied lives and vocabulary of all the world's mystics. The spiritual journey is a constant interplay between moments of awe, followed by a general process of surrender to that moment. We must first allow ourselves to be captured by the goodness, truth, or beauty of something beyond and outside ourselves. Then we universalize from that moment to the goodness, truth, and beauty of the rest of reality, until our realization eventually ricochets back to include ourselves. This is the great inner dialogue we call prayer. Yet we humans resist both the awe and even more, the surrender. The ego resists the awe, while the will resists the surrender. But both together are vital and necessary. The way to any universal idea is to proceed through a concrete encounter. The one is the way to the many. The specific is the way to the spacious. The now is the way to the always. The here is the way to the everywhere. The material is the way to the spiritual. The visible is the way to the invisible. When we see contemplatively, we know that we live in a fully sacramental universe, where everything is a pointer and epiphany. Walter Brueggemann, my favorite Hebrew scripture scholar, calls this concrete to universal principle the scandal of the particular, and points out how it is the pattern of the entire biblical narrative. The trouble is that most people stay with arguing about and focusing on the particular, the exact opposite of awe, and never make the wondrous journey toward the universal. Always and every. They substitute relative truth for absolute truth, so much so that our postmodern world denies the very existence of any absolutes. We tend to worship the mediator of the message instead of following the message itself, the finger pointing to the moon instead of standing in stunned silence before the moon itself. While philosophers tend toward the universals and poets love the particulars, it is the mystics who teach us how to encompass both. Sorry, lost the voice there toward the end. Okay, any initial reactions to that passage? It's a lot of stuff there.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on to those thoughts, those nascent thoughts that are still in there. And let's go back to page 7. And let's begin again. And let's take it apart kind of section by section now that we've read the whole thing for context. And see if we can break it down and see if that starts to spark more comments and thoughts. You know, the first thing I wanted to take a look at was that epigraph. It's a wonderful little passage from Isaiah. I am ready to be approached by those who do not study me, ready to be found by those who do not seek me. I say, I am here to people who do not even invoke my name. So this comes from the second to the last chapter of Isaiah. Isaiah is one of the longest of the prophets. 66 chapters. This is the beginning of chapter 65. And in this chapter, the Lord is excoriating the Hebrew people for their unfaithfulness. Now, just to put this in context, the Hebrews were conquered by the Babylonians in about something like early 500s, 530-ish, right around there. Isaiah, the first 39 chapters of Isaiah were probably written by the historical prophet. Most scholars now break the book of Isaiah into at least 2 parts, 1 through 39 and then 40 through 66. They believe now that the first part of the book through verse 39 was actually written by Isaiah the prophet in that historical time before the Babylonian captivity. But they date the second half of Isaiah about 150 to 200 years later, at the end of the Babylonian captivity, when the people were being allowed by now the Persians to go back into the land. So it just depends on the scholar that you're talking to. More conservative scholars, of course, are going to put the book together as one and early date it. And then more liberal scholars, for lack of a better word, less conservative scholars, are going to break it into 2. But the forensic, syntactical and evidence kind of points toward the second idea here. But because it's interesting that if this second part, and of course this is going to be in that second part, so it was written as the people were coming back to Israel from over 70 years of captivity in Babylon, and only about 50,000 Jews did. Most Jews stayed in Babylon. That was their home. There were 3 or 4 generations there. And so most of them didn't want to go back into the frontier and deal with all the hardships that were going to be involved in trying to rebuild the ruins of their homeland, after 70 years. Crazy. So only about 50,000 did. But what Isaiah seems to be making the distinction between are those people who had now adopted Gentile traditions and forms, because in that book he's talking about those who now eat the flesh of swine, who now do this and do that, and talking about them moving away from the roots of the law. And those people he is excoriating against. But then at the end of the chapter, he brings it around to the promises that are going to be fulfilled for those who stay with him and are faithful. So it's kind of an interesting mix between the two, and it kind of moves back and forth. But I love this first line that Rohr puts here, because once again, it shows that God is always present, always waiting for us to come back. There is never a time when the door is completely shut. So for even those who do not study, he's ready to be approached. Even those who aren't seeking, he's ready to be found. And even for those who are not invoking his name, he is constantly saying, here I am, here I am. And so here's this God who is the consummate gentleman, I suppose, if you want, a gentlewoman, who is not asserting himself into us and into our lives, but always present, always waiting. It's perfect for a study on contemplation, because this is what contemplation is all about. It's about finding a God who is already there, always has been there, who is always present, that it's only us who are blocking our connection and our presence with God. And contemplation is the way to break through that impasse, to break through everything that keeps us separated from not only God's presence, but each other's as well. But to remind ourselves that God is always there, no matter what we're feeling, no matter how million miles away we might be feeling from any kind of connection, God is always right there as close as our next breath. And all we have to do is break through what is inside of ourselves that is keeping us from being able to be connected. So I just thought that was a perfect beginning to all of this. Any thoughts or comments on that?
Well, what came to my mind when I first heard this was the Rumi poem about taking down the instrument. For some reason that just came to my mind as, instead of reaching for your mind and the study to go into play the musical instrument, to go to the right side or the creative side of yourself, which to me, I saw a correlation between contemplation versus the mind, so it kind of just spoke to me in that way, in some strange way, but it did come to mind.
That's great. The poem she's talking about, it's called The Great Wagon, and it's the one where he says, out beyond thoughts of right doing and wrong doing, there is a field, I'll meet you there. It's that same poem that she's talking about. And he says, yeah, when you get to this point, put down the study books, go pick up a musical instrument. In other words, move from the left brain to the right brain.
Yeah.
Move into this place of pure presence where you're experiencing things in a different way. Stop trying to pound the door down with your intellect. So yeah, that's a great connection with me.
Thanks.
Anything else?
Also, what jumped out at me, Dave, when you read further on, this first section was how he's kind of reminding us how our ego continues to get in the way of, preventing us from seeing this awe or sitting with it in the moment of kind of a thing. So, there we are again with our dreaded ego always getting in the way. We need it, but those double-edged swords, I guess.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we're going to talk about that in just a second. But, even just looking at the title, awe and surrendering to it, that's the whole thing. Until we can break through the stranglehold that our left brain, that our egoic consciousness has on the way that we look at reality, the filter that is in place between us and reality, until we break through that, there is no way that we can have the kind of experience that Rosemary's talking about in the Rumi poem, or the kind of experience that Moses had at the burning bush. There's no way to do that. There has to be a breakthrough. And usually it's some kind of awe-inspiring event that breaks us through if it's coming from the outside. But what contemplation is doing is training us to do it from the inside out. So we don't need an intense event. like Brother Lawrence, we can just pick up the straw from the ground and it becomes an awe-inspiring event if we're doing it with the complete presence of God in the midst of it all. And so that's what we're talking about here. How do we break through the stranglehold that the ego and consciousness has over us so that we can have this other experience? That's the key to it. So he says, perhaps more than anything else, just this is a book about seeing, but a kind of seeing that is much more than mere looking, because it also includes recognizing and appreciating. So it's not just about collecting more data. See, that's what we typically do when we see. We're collecting more data, more factoids, and the left brain is happy, and it's collecting and categorizing and judging and, you know, putting it into its dualistic pigeonholes and all the things that the mind does, and it's staying occupied that way. But beyond just the seeing of the actual elements is the recognizing and appreciating of what's underneath them, having this kind of dual vision where we're seeing the surface of things, but we're also aware of and recognizing what's deeper. And so this idea of the contemplative mind does not tell us what to see, but teaches us how to see what we behold. He's taking the words right out of my playbook. How many times have I been talking about, you know, God's will not being a what, but being a how? You know, it's the same thing here. You know, we're obsessed with the what. We're obsessed with the details. We're looking for certainty. We're looking for a foolproof plan. We're looking always at all the surface and physical elements of any moment. But God isn't so interested in that. And contemplation is not trying to reinforce that particular ability that we've already honed through an art form, right? What it's trying to do and what God is interested in is how we see. And how does that seeing connect us with what we're seeing? Because our typical egoic way of seeing is disconnecting us. It's creating a subject and an object, an I thou, right? Instead of a thou thou. So what we're looking for is a different way of seeing, different how in the seeing that moves beyond just what we normally do. And this is the hallmark of contemplative practice. So contemplation allows us to see the truth of things in their wholeness, not just bits and pieces, not just the ones that we compare and contrast. It's a mental discipline and gift that detaches us even neurologically from our addiction to our habitual way of thinking from our left brain, which likes to think it is in control. And of course, that's the bottom line, isn't it? We want to be in control. We are scared creatures that are looking for certainty, and we're looking for a way to control what is going on. You know, classic ACA, right? Adult children of alcoholics, is to be control freaks. Because when we are growing up as children in such a chaotic environment, anything that we can do to control even one little corner of our space is like golden. It allows us to breathe. Because if we can control this, then in some way we can imagine that we're safe. And we end up doing this throughout our lives, always looking for certainty. And so we're addicted to that. So what he's talking about is that the mental discipline of contemplation is what can begin to detach us from that addiction. It can break us away from that addiction. We can stop believing our little binary mind, which strips things down to two choices and then identifies with one of them, and begin to recognize the inadequacy of that limited way of knowing reality. So this is a different way of living and perceiving life itself. It's not just a prayer form. It's actually a different way of living life. Kind of like the difference between dieting and actually changing your diet, your way of approaching life in a more healthy way that becomes your new lifestyle, rather than just trying to diet for a period of time in order to hit a certain result or outcome. If contemplation is approached that way, it's going to fail. It isn't about working as a means to an end. Contemplation is the end in itself. You know, that line of Merton that I'm always quoting, where he said, you know, that sometimes we enter into contemplation by, standing in front of the mirror and making contemplative faces at ourselves, trying to be something and trying to fill the image of what it is we think it means to be a contemplative for whatever reason we think we want to be one. But when all that just starts to go away and we're entering into just a new way of seeing, a new how, that's when things really start. So only the contemplative, I'm in the middle of page 8, or the deeply intuitive can start venturing out into much broader and more open-ended horizons. This is probably why Einstein said that imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited. Imagination encircles the world. Anyone want to comment on what Einstein is saying there? What's the distinction he's making between imagination and knowledge?
I love the distinction between imagination and knowledge. The greatest thinkers in the world are those who went beyond what they were taught, and they imagined something greater. Socrates, for heaven's sake, is a great teacher, and I love that Einstein said. I mean, he was a great. A great creator, and I love that he put it in this, in this small saying: imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge to me can be limited and limiting, whereas imagination has no limits, and it offers us the opportunity to create and therefore grow and attain more knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
My feeling is such that knowledge is quite often the upshot of imagination.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I heard one person, I think it was Russ Hudson, what's his name, from the Enneagram fame. He said most of us walk around regurgitating things we heard intelligent people say. And I'm guilty of that for sure. But it sounds like we're having these deep, profound thoughts, but there's no real thinking that's going on. You're just echoing something that you saw in a meme a few days ago. And yeah, that's the thought that popped into head here.
I'm reading a New York Times bestseller memoir because I'm trying to learn from the best memoirists. I decided learning is one thing, but then actually learning is another thing. So 254 weeks on the bestseller list. And this thing is phenomenal because it's told from the vantage point of the 3-year-old daughter of two really messed up parents that are vagabonds all over the Southwest. I mean, they're just loonies. They're lunatics. But she's 3, and I'm 20% of the way of the book in, and now she's 6. And so the author is writing using the vocabulary and the sentences of a 3 to 6-year-old. Okay. And painting the picture in real time without any knowledge of what it's like inside her parents' head. But I swear I know the inside of her parents' head now better than I've ever known anything. And none of it was given to me by the author. It's just the observation of the 3 to 6-year-old. And so my imagination is just taken away. And I see now why this is a bestseller is your mind is so wired for imagination that you can take a 4 or 5-year-old's vocabulary and paint a whole world with it.
What's the name of the book, Ken?
It's called the Glass Castle.
Okay, interesting.
Going back a little bit in that paragraph there, I was just I I'm gonna echo something I heard somebody say earlier, so I can sound intelligent, by the way. Um, I was listening to this YouTube thing where the speaker was saying that we were born with our minds are supposed to be completely free, essentially, so that we function in this way woo way kind of place, the effortless effort, where you're just free to respond to the moment or to the demands of each instant as it unfolds, essentially. But echoing what Richard Rohr said a little earlier, it's our need for control and to make things predictable that gives birth to our habits, our internal mental habits, so that we keep going back to things that works, essentially. And that becomes the building block of this egoic projection, where all of the different egoic formations are all an effort to control the chaos. And it's all driven from this fear or need to control kind of dynamic. And I just thought that was a cool way of thinking about, this idea of the truth setting us free and the ego keeping us in our cage, basically.
You sounded very intelligent just then, William. Good
I'd
job.
like to, yeah, I saw that like knowledge is, or what I got, knowledge is something that can be debated by scholars, but imagination is inspiration that gives birth to new beginnings.
Yeah.
And I give you, I worked for Elon for many years, and I remember a time when they were telling him that he couldn't land his rocket, but he had this dream and vision, right? Because that's the way his brain works, that it was stupid to think you couldn't, right? and now many have repeated what him being the first. And so I think that, the knowledge is those scholars that, we can get in there with our words and debate these things forever. But when you're in that inspirational connection, that God is birthing that new truth in you. And it's a truth new to you, but it's always been there for him. And he's sharing that with us.
Is that where wasn't Elon the first one to say, "Hold my beer"?
He might have been. I never heard that, but
When they said you can't do that, he said, "Hold my beer."
yeah.
All right, enough of my outtakes.
Well, give me a chance to be more intelligent than William. I find myself going back to a book by Thomas Kuhn called "The Structure of Scientific Revolutions," and it's usually a book that you get in a methodology class or some introduction to science class. And basically, he says that there's a paradigm or a way of thinking about the world that explains what we see and makes sense of it. And then what happens is there's something that's surprising or anomalous. And then the imaginative mind isn't a mind that's going out doing weird things. The imaginative mind that Einstein's talking about comes up with a new paradigm or a new way of thinking about the world that absorbs that surprise or explains that surprise and becomes a more accurate model of what's going on. For example, people were looking at the orbit of Mercury, and they always noticed it had this little funky, weird change in it. And Einstein was the first guy to say, like, oh, well, that's the power of the gravity of the other planets around it. Or, why you can see a star behind the sun. It's because the gravity of the sun bends the light so that you can see it. So I see this with what Richard Rohr is saying, that it's hard to be part of one of those scientific revolutions or to move into a new paradigm if you're not, if you reject surprises, or if you don't pay attention to anomalous information, then it's unlikely that you're going to have that, I don't know, that stress or that pain or that curiosity that leads you to an improved understanding.
That is perfect. That view is exactly what we're talking about here. That's what the awe is about, right? The awe is what breaks through what you already think you know. It breaks through the accepted narrative, the accepted knowledge base, kind of like with Elon Musk, same thing. And then what happens is we go from left brain to right brain because the left brain can't process. The left brain has now hit a limit situation. It's at the limit of its ability to understand, control, process, or make meaning or sense. So now we go over to the right brain, which can then be unrestrained and accommodate that, bring it in, and then come up with a new paradigm. So that's exactly what contemplation is all about. That's exactly what the spiritual journey is all about. Think about it. It is a series of breakthroughs, awe-inspiring breakthroughs that break us into a larger and larger playing field where we're going to have to make new meaning and reaccommodate because the old way that we looked at life no longer applies. It just can't stretch far enough. What did Jesus say about old wineskins, right? You got to put the new wine into new wineskins that can stretch. Imagine, this extra volume. And it's the same thing here. He always held up the child. The child is the one who lives in the world of imagination. The child doesn't even make distinctions between what is interior and what is exterior. It's all one for the child. That's why they're taken in by magic. That's why they can play with a toy plane, and to them it's really soaring in the atmosphere because they don't make those kind of distinctions between what is interior and they're imagining and what is exterior. It all becomes one thing. And so once again, here's Jesus holding up this child and saying, this is what it looks like to be in kingdom. This is what it looks like to be connected in an abundant life. And so it's all of a piece here. And this is what we're up against. And if we're going to approach a contemplative life, we're going to need to approach it in this way, where it's not that we lose our intellect, but we prefer it less in some ways. That idea of hating your father and mother, but the word that he uses there is sana, which means to prefer less. If we can't do that, if we can't prefer less the conventions and everything that has kept us safe to date in favor of something where we can move completely out, then we're never going to be able to go where Jesus is going. Because make no mistake, Jesus is a mystic and a contemplative. And if you have problems with those words, then you're going to have problems with the way Jesus is really trying to teach us. This is what it's all about, that ability to break through. And so this distinction between imagination and knowledge is huge. We could also think of it as the distinction between knowledge and wisdom. Maybe the same kind of distinction can be made there. But we've got to be able to be willing to at least try to balance these two and to break through, to break beyond, be willing to sell everything that we think we know in order to get into some new space. And then some new space after that, and then after that, because it never ends. The process doesn't end. But what you do what does happen as you continue down the path is that it gets easier and easier to sell everything that you own and give it away and follow. Because you realize that even though it's painful, the change is painful, the growing pains into the new space is always painful. But you know that there is something there to catch you on the other side. You become convinced of that. And so the fear starts to dissipate through these next burning bush and the one after that and the one after that. The burning bush is a great example in itself. Here is something that's anomalous, just like John was saying. This anomaly, this isn't supposed to happen. If something burns, it gets consumed. What the heck? I'm going to have to turn aside and go take a look at this, And Moses is willing to do that. He had 40 years of silence in the back of beyond with his sheep to develop a shepherd's consciousness that allowed him to perhaps even see this, and would have just hurried past in his old life as an Egyptian. But this is what it's all about. This is the way it works. And we have to really think about how we're approaching our prayer life, our contemplation, our spiritual journeys. Because if it's too left-brained, then it's not going to work. And I think I said in here, or someplace anyway, if it feels familiar, then you're probably not doing it right.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, it's going to feel very different than anything we're familiar with, especially as modern Westerners, because we are completely addicted to our knowledge base and our fact base.
I'm listening to this podcast. This was about a couple of weeks ago, and I don't remember when it was, but it was a physicist being interviewed. I listened to this Biologos, which is, science and God and faith. So the physicist said, yeah, you see the rainbow. It's beautiful and it's awesome. And as a physicist, you learn when he was young, it's the light was divided because of that water and so on. But for him too, though it's left-brained explanation, he still sees the awesomeness of that scientific explanation. And I think that's the balance where he has, where the beauty of the rainbow is still beautiful, and the explanation is also very beautiful. You see.
And Ellen, that's perfect, because that's what we want to hit. We want to hit a balance. If we have made the mistake of flopping down on the left brain and our rationality completely, we will make an equal mistake if we flop down on the right brain and try to experience everything unitively. In this life, we're going to have to balance between the two. Leave the paradox unresolved and experience what the sacred tension is like between those two poles. And so, yes, we're looking for a balance. And you just described a perfect way of seeing that balance. Great. Next paragraph. He says, well, how do we do this, right? I mean, that's the next logical question. How do we learn this contemplative mind, this deep, mysterious, and life-giving way of seeing, of being with reality? Why does it not come naturally to us? Well, it sort of does when we're children, but we learn our way out of it as soon as we hit the age of reason, as soon as we get to the point where our minds can actually think reflectively, can actually think rationally, where we can start to see ourselves as separate from everything else. That's when it becomes difficult. But then he goes on to say, actually, it does come momentarily in states of great love and great suffering, but such wide-eyed seeing normally doesn't last. I think I first reacted to this truth when I was an early evangelical, some 35 years ago, and we'd go to these weekend retreats. Remember the weekend retreats? We have an annual men's retreat, and we go up to the mountains. And, I'd have some great insight up there that this has got to be life-changing, some real breakthrough up on the mountaintop. And then I'm thinking it's going to change my life, but by Wednesday of the next week, I was already back in the same patterns I was before. The breakthrough gives us this momentary lift. But then if we aren't continuing to do the work day by day, it gets left in the dust. It doesn't last. You can talk about the same thing with a great conversion experience. People who have told me about their conversion to Christianity and how it just was life-changing. Sometimes it took away their addictions, God took away my need for alcohol and this and that. But, check back in a year or two and see how they're doing if they haven't been doing the day-to-day work behind that. The burning bush is a great example. As amazing experience as that would have been for Moses, if he didn't back it up with anything, it would have been left in the dust. So also just our great loves in life that break us through when we fall in love, that breaks us through the left brain into the right brain. That presents us a whole new paradigm that we're going to have to deal with. And also great loss, the death of a loved one, the death of a dream, the loss of a job, whatever it happens to be. All these life events are intense enough to break us through the filter of seeing the world the way that we have learned to see it. And suddenly we're seeing a there that we never knew existed before, or never admitted that it existed. And sometimes it's frightening and sometimes it's beautiful, but it will only be momentary. The mind will close back in on itself as it does, unless we take that opportunity to then continue on that path. It's so important for us to realize this. No matter how intense the experience is, it will only be momentary if we don't back it up. I used to say, if I could just have one burning bush, I would be set. I'd be done. You know, but that's not the way it works. It does not last. We return quickly to dualistic analysis, Rohr writes, and use our judgments to retake control, because that's what really is our biggest fear, that we don't have any control over these things. Think about it. We're these little creatures walking around on a ball spinning in space with these fragile bodies that anything can take us out. I mean, we know that in the back of our minds. Not only that, we're walking around with a death sentence. We all know that we're not going to survive this thing. I mean, it's crazy when you think about that we can actually think about that. Animals don't have to carry that burden because they don't think that way. They can't step outside themselves and see the way that we're walking around so vulnerably, so out of control. And so the mind likes to imagine that we do have this control, just like the child of the alcoholic parents tries to imagine that they can control this corner of their room. At least I can do that. And so that's going to reassert itself unless we take the opportunity when we have these breakthroughs to build on them. We can say, this has thrown me so far down the path. I'm going to continue from this point and not scurry back because the wave is coming in, right? A prayer practice, contemplation, is simply a way of maintaining the fruits of great love and great suffering over the long haul and in different situations. It's a way of creating a permanent condition as long as we continue to give it energy, right? And give it attention and maintaining that awe that breaks through from time to time. But it takes a lot of practice. In fact, our whole life is going to become continual practice. It's like how long is that lamp going to stay lit once you unplug it from the wall? Right? If we aren't plugged into the source, we're going to stay lit as long as that lamp is lit. And that is a truth. To begin to see with new eyes, we must observe and usually be humiliated by the habitual way we encounter each and every moment. I thought that was an interesting word, humiliated. We probably didn't like it very much. Now, he defines the humiliation is because we will see that we are well practiced in just a few predictable responses. Few of our responses are original, fresh, or naturally respectful. The most common human responses to a new moment are mistrust, cynicism, fear, knee-jerk reactions, a spirit of dismissal, and overriding judgmentalism. It's so discouraging when we have the courage to finally see that these are the common ways the ego tries to be in control of the data, instead of allowing the moment to get some control over us and teach us something new. Now, I want to take a look at this in just a little different way. I mean, he says it's discouraging and it's humiliating that we have this propensity to look at new things with distrust. But I want you to think about this. This is really a bioevolutionary product. It is a means to survival. Think about it. If you didn't have the ability to be able to experience what happens in your life and to categorize those experiences as either friend or foe, as either helpful or threatening, and then be able to store that for quick retrieval, how in the world would we be able to survive? Think of yourself as a proto-human back in the forest with the rest of the animals trying to survive that experience. You know, if you couldn't learn and be taught, you know, these berries are good to eat, these berries are going to kill you, and this is threatening. I mean, we need to know that, and we need to know it instantly so that we can react and be able to survive. These are evolutionary products that serve us really well, and they're absolutely essential. And so in the absence of knowing if something that's coming at you is friend or foe, what is the safest thing to do? Assume that it's a foe and react that way. Because if it's a friend, you're no worse off. But if it is a foe, now you're defended. And so these are things that are absolutely essential biologically. Now it's a matter of us trying to rise above the programming to be able to act appropriately in situations. But I don't know that it's discouraging or humiliating to realize that that's part of our animal programming and the part that has allowed us to survive, and is still good practice if you're walking down that dark alley in a part of town that you're lost in, like when Marion and I found ourselves in the Tenderloin in San Francisco walking, and it's like treat everything as a threat, and you might actually survive until proven otherwise, right? So it's just this is a reality. I think, you know, it's something that will serve us well when there really is a reason for fight or flight. But as emotionally regulated adults, and as people who are free enough to be able to really interact and have meaningful relationships, we're going to need to be able to rise above that programming. And in terms of contemplation, to be able to really see unitively, we need to be able to rise above that programming as well. But I think what we're doing is we're fighting a part of our human nature that is absolutely essential, but it's just not always appropriate. So once again, we're trying to look at a balance.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was pretty wild what you just said there. But I mean, I'm hearing, like, when you said fight or flight there at the end, it was like that's pretty much how I was raised and I've been living. But contemplation is another, or it can be another, or it should be another choice that I have.
Mhm.
But I've been so reactive, it's not been a choice.
Mhm.
But this is saying, hey, no, it ought to be your priority.
Hmm.
But I'm still gonna have these fight or flight things that are happening, no matter what I do. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
And Tony, if you grew up that way, the trauma that you experience, especially as a child, actually rewires the brain. And so it's going to be like night follows day. Once the brain is operating a certain way, that you are going to have triggered thought and behavior patterns out of that. And it's not until in contemplation or in therapy or whatever we do that we become aware enough in real time to see what is triggering us, that we can actually start to make different choices. And so this is also what we're doing to rise above our programming. It's the programming not of us genetically as a species or a race, but also the programming of our own life experience starting from earliest childhood. And to be this is what Jesus means. If you will follow my ways, you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. Free from what? Well, free from all this programming that we don't even know is going on down in the unconscious. To be able to get free from that and to be able to make our own choices in real time and do what love actually requires, rather than just what the immediate reaction is. That's the kind of freedom we're talking about. That allows us to truly be connected with each other.
But I want to add something to about, the awe, the first time, let's say something is rare, it happened for the first time, or I saw it the first time. I mean, awe, it's mysterious, it's magical. But then if you see it every day, you get desensitized. I think that's part of our brain. I see the pearl, I go, oh my gosh, it's beautiful. The first person who found the pearl in an oyster, I go, how beautiful this is. And then tomorrow they find 10 more, and tomorrow they find 20 more. And then it becomes an industry, right? So for them, they get desensitized. It's no longer this awesome, precious thing, but it is for those who've never seen it, and they sell the pearl as precious. You understand what I mean?
Absolutely. Let's think about this for just a second. One time we talk about our dogs as being so wonderful because every time we come home, they greet us as if we were gone for a month. And every time you come home, they greet you in the same way. They're jumping around, they're whining, they're putting their paws up. And it's so great to be able to be greeted that way. Imagine, though, if that was a human being doing that. I mean, you'd realize that there's some kind of problem going on here. I mean, yes, we have to be able to get accommodated to things. We have to become familiar with things. We don't want to, once again, it's a balance. We can't be reacting to everything as if it were the first time, the way a dog does or a small child does. But we also never want to lose the awe that undergirds these things, even as we get more familiar with them and act appropriately as we do. We would never get anything done in life if we were always reacting to everything as if it truly was for the first time, and that awe took us out, the way it did the first time. There has to be this balance. And so this is kind of what we're talking about. Can we live life appropriately as an adult human being, but never lose our ability to see beyond that and to be grateful and appreciative, to recognize and appreciate, as Rohr puts it, the essence behind the things that have become familiar. And so there is, once again, there's this balance that we have to strike. All right. That's about as far as we're going to get tonight, but we did pretty well. We got one page. No, we got actually 2 pages.
Interesting.
Good.
Dave, you skipped over a line that I thought was a really important line in the middle
Go
of
for it.
page 2.
Which
It
one?
says, a binary mind is a recipe for superficiality, if
Mhm.
not silliness. And I underlined that one, and when you were rereading, you skipped that particular line. What was up with
This is where you have to come in and hold my feet to the fire, man. Absolutely. That's a great line. I have it actually in brackets here as well. I just missed it. But that's important to understand. So this ability, the key ability that our minds have is to be binary, to be dualistic, to compare and contrast and put things into pigeonholes for quick retrieval. So in times of fight or flight, we can go right to that. We don't even really have to go through the neocortex. We're just right to the lizard brain and right back out with some sort of action. That's the beauty of our minds and what they allow us to do. And so we need that. But if we're only operating that way, then by definition, we're always going to be superficial, because we're never really seeing the moment for what it is. We're only seeing what the moment triggers in us for a response that is geared towards survival. And we never are really going to be able to be fully present. And so, yes, that binary mind is a recipe for superficiality, if not silliness, but that doesn't mean that it's also not essential. That's one thing that Rohr seems to be moving so far to one side that he's not presenting the balance. I bet if he were here and we were talking to him, he would say the same thing I'm saying. Yes, obviously there has to be a balance. Maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't, who knows? But what's here written, I just wanted to try to restore some balance to this, because the way our minds work is what separates us from the animal kingdom, and it's essential to us as sentient beings. But we need to balance it. And that's what takes the practice. That's what's difficult, because the egoic mind doesn't want to run that way. It wants to control. It wants to find certainty. It wants to compare and contrast and then choose one and be certain of it. That's the way it survives. And that's what we're trying to break through, even as we continue to use that ability as a tool that we need it to be.
It's interesting that you balance that out really well, Dave, because I'm seeing the survival that, for instance, there's all these people that are coming from foreign countries into America. I'm not trying to make this political, but like they don't have, I think, some of the knowledge that some of us here may have, and yet they're just trying to survive, and they're making these decisions, life and death at times, for themselves and their family. And on the contrast of that is those of us that sometimes have gained this knowledge and we kind of like work and live within those means, then that's not so good either. And I think that contemplation is a good way of us pulling back and contrasting that. So I thought that was wonderful that you balanced out that we survive through that knee-jerking ego, because if we didn't have it, then we wouldn't survive, right? And we just lay over and die. But so there is that balance. And I think from what I'm hearing and I probably got more to work out, is like if you can get past that, and I think that's where the discouraging that Richard's talking about. And then, hey, I finally got the courage to do that, and I'm getting the tools, and it's like, crap, I can't get it right.
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
you'll find there's going to be endless applications to this, in every walk of life. I just want to make sure that we don't feel ashamed of the way our minds work. It's essential. It's beautiful the way our minds work, but we need now to work to break through that and see that we have two halves to this whole, and we need to bring them together. Once we do that, then we can have our cake and eat it too, basically.
Yeah,
That's what
amen
we
to
do.
that.
Mhm.
All right. Okay, well, let's call it a night for tonight. Great start to this. Thanks everyone for being here to kick this off. I'll get the recording out tomorrow. If anyone wants to relive the bliss, you can do that. And where are you, Scotty? There you are. Scott.
God, thank you for this time together and explore and question and learn and poke fun at and every aspect of the creative process that you gave us to be called your children. Curiosity gets the best of us, and we want to go out and explore how things work and how things can be made better. So help us to not lean on our own understanding, acknowledge you in all our ways, trust you with all our heart. And your promises, you'll make our path straight, and we count on you for that promise and that prayer, Lord. We thank you, Lord Jesus, in your holy precious name we pray. We give our thanks and say amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
you.
Good to see
If
you
you're
all.
here
Good night,
locally, don't
everybody.
forget. Don't
Good
forget
to
about
see
Friends.
everyone.
Don't
Is that
forget about
Jerry's voice I
Friendsgiving.
just heard? Where is Jerry? Jerry,
I'm here.
how you doing?
I'm here. Here's the family picture.
Okay, okay. I
All
totally
right.
missed
Really
that.
like that.
That's my daughter and her husband and 4 of my grandchildren at the beach.
Nice.
Oh,
We're getting the
Thanks.
whole photo album instead of Jerry's face tonight.
That's right. Tonight was just
Okay.
not, I couldn't find the camera.
All right.
So
William, will I
so
see you
this
Thursday
Friday-
night?
Yes, I'll see you tomorrow night.
Okay. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Good night, everybody.
everybody.
Sunday.
Great to
Good
see
night,
you.
everybody. See you
Good night,
Friday.
everyone.
Bye.
See you guys on Friday.
All right. Bye, Jordana. Bye, Linda. Bye, John.
Bye.
See you guys. And
See you guys on
iPhone.
Friday.
Oh, Sharon, if you're still there. Goodbye to you too, dear.
Bye.
Soak on Friday?
Yes, Soak and Friendsgiving on Friday, John, if you hadn't heard, 6 o'clock Friday night for dinner. And
Okay, we'll be
you
there
can
then.
bring a side if you'd like, or a dessert, or just show up. We'll have the turkey and the ham and the drinks and all. And
Yeah,
then
we
and then the
prepared
band's gonna
lasagna.
play, and then the band's gonna play afterwards for about an hour plus. So
Oh,
So
God.
Dave, what time does Vernon have to be there on Friday?
5 o'clock.
5 o'clock, okay, I'll let him know.
John, 6 o'clock for you, but the band is coming an hour early.
Okay, I'll let him know.
Okay. All right, everybody. See you then.
See ya,
Bye.
bye.